All right, so our official start. Welcome to our conference today, our webinar today. We have over 270 people registered, so that's pretty exciting turnout for us. Thank you to our sponsor today. Our sponsor is the North Maine Woods, Inc. organization. If you've gone up north and explored the Maine North Woods, you've probably gone through one of their gates. They're a great organization and do a lot for conservation in northern lands. We have an article in their upcoming newsletter about invasives and are happy that they agreed to sponsor this webinar today. Just a refresher, I'm trying to do this for every webinar. Every webinar in this series is related to our lake book, which is a new edition is coming out hopefully by the end of this webinar series. And so just a little teaser, we're going to have a page or two on loons and information about loons. And this is going to be a great resource for anybody who's living on a lake, using a lake, knows somebody who lives on a lake, visits a lake. So that's coming out. Look for that in the spring. So this is our panel today, and I think everybody is on video. And I'm just going to stop sharing the screen for a moment so that you can see everybody a little better. And I think if you guys just want to go around, we'll do a quick introduction, just a couple of sentences. There was hopefully people were on a little bit early. The pre-webinar slideshow ran through everybody's bio in good detail, and we have a lot of questions to answer today. So I'm just going to give you all just 2 sentences about yourselves. So why don't we just start with Danielle? Let's start with you.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name's Danielle D'Auria. I'm a wildlife biologist for the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. And my primary job is basically as a species specialist. I deal with loons as well as a lot of other water bird species like herons and black terns, other colonial water birds. So concentrate on statewide populations and understanding how they're doing. So I'm happy to be here. Great, thanks. And Tracy?
Hi, I'm Tracy Hart, and I work for Maine Audubon, and I'm a wildlife biologist, and I'm also manage the Maine Loon project, which involves the annual loon count, which probably many of you are part of, and some fish-led free initiative work, as well as some other projects around loons.
Great. Jim?
Hi, my name's Jim Paruk. I'm a professor at St. Joseph's College. I've been studying loons as a researcher since 1993. And the last 10 years have been really focused on what loons do in the wintertime in terms of their ecology and behavior, and less or so what they're doing in the summer. So usually in the summer when people are looking at loons, I'm analyzing and looking at data.
Lucas.
Hi, Lucas Savoy, a wildlife biologist with a nonprofit based here in Portland, Maine, BioDiversity Research Institute. I've been here since 2000 as a staff biologist and work a lot with loons and also other water birds, sea ducks. So yeah, research interest in loons and other birds that like water.
And Mark.
Hi, I'm Mark Pokras. I'm a wildlife veterinarian. I work with everybody that you can see on the screen here, and we have for many years. I used to teach at Tufts Veterinary School. I retired to Maine a number of years ago. And I'm responsible in working with Maine Audubon and BRI and Danielle and Maine Lakes and everybody else in trying to figure out why loons die. We do all the post-mortem examinations.
Great. Thank you. And I don't think I ever said my name, but it's Susan Gallo, and I'm the executive director at Maine Lakes, and I worked for about 20 years on, for Maine Audubon on the loon count, and then in the 90s and through the 2000s. So it's great to have this group here. I will say this is definitely an all-star loon expert panel for Maine. We usually all get together in person around this time in New Hampshire for a group called the Northeast Loon Study Work Group. So this is a poor substitute for seeing them there, because they're, in addition to being incredibly knowledgeable about loons, they're also just some of the best people ever to chat with and to learn from. So thank you all so much for coming here. Hopefully I'll see you in person at Nell's Wig next year. But thank you so much for being here and attempting. This is kind of a new one for us to do an all Q&A webinar, so we'll see how it goes. So now I just have to go back. If technology would just cooperate and make things easier. I guess maybe it's me, but hold on one second. I'll see if I can. So close to having this mastered. Let's see. Let's see if I can do it. Let's see. Is that the slide? Does that have this? Can you guys see the slide with a panel of the speakers?
Yes.
Okay. Whew. Usually there's like a green ring around it and it's not showing on my screen. But anyway, all right. So let's jump into our questions. All right. So this first one is for Tracy, and somebody asked, great question to start us off. How is the loon population doing in Maine? And so Tracy, I did put up your population graph that you sent me, if you want to use that for your answer.
Thank you. All right. Yeah. So this is the estimated loon population, and this is for the southern half of Maine. So we get data from all over Maine from the Maine annual loon count, but we only get enough data to be able to estimate the full population for the southern half. This data is thanks to many of you who've been part of the loon count since it started back in 1983. And so you can see from here that the loon population has been steadily rising since the loon count started 37 years ago. So the adult population is in the yellow. Chicks have risen some, but it has been much flatter along the way. And I think there might be a question about why that is. One thing to think about is that you can see these last 2 years, the adults have been going down a bit. That if that were to continue, we would be concerned about that, but there is variation from year to year. So at this point, not really concerned about that. There's variation both in how loons are doing, and then there's also variation in the count itself. So maybe it's foggy, or maybe maybe there was too windy for people to get out. So there can be a lot of reasons why the numbers fluctuate. So we're really looking for trends. So yeah, so the basic answer is the population's doing quite well in Maine.
Well, I'll add on, somebody else asked this question. They had specific numbers for their lake, but the point of the gist of their question, and a couple people asked this, is that the adult population is going up, but the red dot squares, the chick population has stayed pretty steady over the time of the loon count. Do you have any insight into that?
Right. Yeah. So that the individual lake that they were talking about does really mirror what we've seen at the state level as well. And there can be a couple reasons. One is it could be, we're seeing lower productivity per pair. So even though it's going up, maybe they're having less productivity for each pair. It could also be that there are a lot more adults that aren't breeding. So if territories are full and there are not enough places, so we usually answer that as probably one of those two things that are causing it. So then you want to start looking at, well, what's the reason for that? So why is it low? Is it nesting failure, or is there, are there lack of breeding attempts? Or so there are quite a few things to start thinking about. And if you're trying to get to that on your individual lake, you want to start looking for those questions. And maybe chicks are dying also. That could be another thing. So maybe they're getting taken, or human disturbance. Anyone else want to try on that one too? You might answer that question very differently. It's a question that's asked a lot.
Yeah, and I know it's definitely something we need more information about, for sure. Next question is for Mark. It's about loon mortality, and I know this alone could be obviously this alone could be a webinar, and Mark could entertain us all and with all of the knowledge he has about loon mortality. but could you just give us sort of a quick overview of the leading causes of mortality in Maine?
Sure. And again, any of the other panelists, Tracy in particular, or Danielle, can feel free to chime in on this. Basically, I think we can divide it into two categories: human-caused mortalities and what you might think of as natural mortalities. In terms of the human-caused mortalities, the patterns haven't changed much. We still see a lot of lead poisoning from fishing gear. We still see a lot of loons entangled in fishing line and dying from that on lakes. And increasingly, we're seeing more and more birds that are hit by boats. As more and more recreational boats get bigger and the horsepower gets bigger and people are driving faster with jet skis and things like that, we're seeing more boat strikes from loons. In terms of, so those are probably the big three from human mortality. In terms of natural mortality, and there was one of the online questions about this, as bald eagle populations are increasing, and this is not just in Maine, this is across North America, we see bald eagles preying more and more on loons, taking eggs, certainly taking lots of chicks, and every once in a while taking adults, particularly adults on nests. So bald eagle mortality is becoming an issue in some areas.
Great, and we have a question more, but there'll be more on eagles coming up. And I should just, a quick aside, if any of the panelists want to answer, there's a bunch of questions coming in through the Q&A. If there's anything you can type in and answer while you're, listening in to somebody else, please feel free to do that. I see a couple have already been answered, but I can't answer them because if I lose my place on my slideshow, I'll be in trouble. So thanks in advance for doing that. So next is a question for Lucas, and I'm sort of handing it to somebody, but any question is up for, it's for any of you to answer. But so for Lucas and maybe Jim too, could you tell us a little bit about banding? Why do we ban loons?
Sure. Yeah, not to give away a lot of the answers or insight into some questions we're going to have later, but banding ties into a lot of those questions. It's a great way to learn a lot about loons and their natural history, their reproductive success. So as everyone knows, loons, the male and female, look the same. The males are a little bit bigger. Some folks who watch their loon pairs in their lakes day in and day out can probably decipher between the male and female by size and behavioral observations. But this is really the only way to distinguish a male versus a female in individuals in the field. So we place unique band combinations. They're plastic bands, generally 3 plastic bands, 2 on one leg, and 1 accompanied with a silver, and that's a federally issued metal band, that silver looking band we get from the bird banding lab. So each adult loon typically has 4 bands, and they're varying combinations and colors. So no loon has the same combination anywhere. So we know who an individual is, and we can track these birds over time. Are they returning to the same lake every year? Did they mate for life? How long do they live? How many babies do they hatch in their lifetime? So it really helps us answer a lot of those questions. And we learn a lot more about loons in the hand too, work with Mark and lots of other researchers too. We'll take a tissue sample from the loons that we collect, and that's how we can look at genetics and contaminants and that sort of thing, and figure out lake health. So loons are great indicators of lake health, and banding is part of that process that we do to help answer some of those questions that we're trying to figure out about loons.
Great. And then let's see. Yeah, we are going to come back to talking about bands because we're going to talk about wintertime loons a little bit here. So somebody asked, when walking the beach in winter, I've seen a few loons. Where do most of them go during the winter months? So I have a quick slide to show the sort of the 20,000 foot view. So, and I think this came from Jim. This slide maybe came from Jim, but I thought I'd just quickly say, here's the arrows. Here are the arrows of general migration patterns. So the loons are across Canada and the northern US, and you can see that arrows are showing the general patterns of directions in terms of where they go. Somebody asked in the question, I did see the question about how do the loons know to show up on ice the day of ice out or the day after or even hours after. Ice out actually happens on a lake, and the answer that my understanding of the answer is that loons are flying over our heads. You know, this graph in reverse. When they're coming north in the spring, they are making scouting trips and checking lakes before they get there to check out the lake, and then, you know, they'll fly north, check out a lake, and then return south to where the water's open. So they're following that open water north, and that's how they know, because they do want to be there right as soon as that ice is out. But anyway, so this is the general map, and then I'm going to hand it over to Lucas and Jim. I think you guys both have great slides here on this about telemetry and banding. So I think, Lucas, I think it goes back to you for banding first, and then you can pass it off to Jim to talk about telemetry.
Okay. Yeah, so here's a quick map that we generated from the loons that we banded all across North America. So to date, our director started banding loons in the early 90s, working with Jim and other colleagues as well. And we have over 5,000 loons banded now throughout North America. But just looking at a map here, you can see these are all the recoveries of banded loons or resites, live resites of banded loons that nature photographers or birders have reported to us. So it provides us insight on where loons do go for the winter time. And the different dots represent the places that they were captured, so their breeding area. And you can see, you know, we kind of highlighted that Cape Cod, Gulf of Maine area is kind of a really big melting pot for a lot of different breeding subpopulations or loons from varying states all congregate in certain areas during the winter months. But banding has really helped us figure a lot of this out, as well as some technology that Jim will talk about too, that we can track specific locations of birds in the wintertime.
Great, Jim. I think, Jim, I have put a couple of your telemetry slides up here.
Sure, I can talk about this one that folks can see here. This was a project done in the early 2010, 11, and 12, as you can see. These were birds banded up in the Rangeley Lakes area. And you can just see the movement of these birds. So up from northern Maine, one of the birds was just off the coast of New Jersey. So it spent the entire winter there. The other bird that's blue in Flagstaff Lake, you can see the male stayed off the coast of Maine, where the female went all the way down to Maryland. So on the same water body, you can see males and females wintered in completely different locations. And then what's really neat about the Aziscahas Lake is that was the pair. That was both the male and female pair that we had. The first time we've been able to put satellite telemetry in a pair of loons, and we can kind of confidently ask ourselves, do males and females overwinter in different locations? Well, this is the exact pair, and you can see the male remained off the coast of Maine and the female went just south of Cape Cod in Massachusetts. So it does bring up an interesting question, right? Why males and females winter in different locations? Looking at this sample set, it's a small size, but it seems like females migrated a little further south than males in each of these pairs, for example.
Sorry, Jim, can you just mention to people who might not be aware how you get this data, how satellite, like one sentence on satellite telemetry and how it works?
Sure. Well, yeah, one sentence. Essentially, we ended up putting these. Yeah, it's a great question, and Lucas can feel free to chime in. He's used these quite a bit. But with loons, we put satellite transmitters actually inside the body cavity. If we put something external, like a solar pack, like would go on albatrosses or eagles, the hydrodynamics of the loons would just be compromised greatly. And so we've worked with wildlife vets who specialize in this techniques. And so we put it inside the body cavity. So just a little antenna sticks out. And that's picking up the satellites that are orbiting the Earth, downloading data on their GPS locations. And then you can plot those on a map. So that's in a short few sentences how that works.
Great, thanks. I think I have another slide too for you here.
And this was some work that a researcher, Kevin Kenow, did with a number of collaborators, including folks from New York and BRI here in Maine. And again, you can just see that these birds that were caught in upper New England, again, spread out along the upper North Atlantic, from New Jersey up to Maine. So again, we see birds that might be closer to the coast tend to remain a little further north. And birds a little more interior, like in the Adirondacks, we might see them going from like Massachusetts down to New Jersey. So a general pattern that we can probably build on down the road.
Yeah, great. And I think I put, oh, sorry, I didn't know it was animated. And then I did put that, you also sent this slide, which I thought people would find interesting.
Yeah, this was a fascinating, you know, you catch a loon random in the Gulf of Mexico. This was after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. We catch a loon in Barataria Bay. We implant, it's a satellite transmitter, have no clue where this bird's going to go. It leaves the Gulf of Mexico, as you can see. It goes along the South Atlantic, gets into Chesapeake Bay, makes its way to Lake Huron, Lake Superior, and ends up all the way in western Saskatchewan with, I think, a total miles was like 2,776 miles. You know, the longest journey that I'm aware of that any loon would have made. And that was quite surprising. And for those of you who are wondering what happened to this bird, it retraced its steps literally the same way and came back to the exact location 8 months later.
That's crazy. That's very interesting. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. And there's the location, yep.
Okay, got it. Okay, this one's for Danielle. And I'm watching my watch. It's 4:25 and we've only gone through 5 questions. So this is going to be really hard. But Danielle, somebody asked about legal and behavioral guidelines to avoid harassing loons, and if there's anything that changes over the seasons for those guidelines. And I don't have a picture for this one, but you want to take a couple minutes for this?
Sure. I mean, really, with all wildlife, it's illegal to harass or, you know, kill wildlife, you know, outside of any legal hunting seasons and so forth. So, you know, it doesn't really change across seasons as far as what's legal and what's not legal. But really, as far as their sensitivity to disturbances and how that can affect their breeding and everything. I mean, with loons, you want to definitely, at least behaviorally, avoid loons, give them space all times of year. But during the breeding season especially, you want to keep your distance, give them space from their nests, from their young, and, you know, just respect those boundaries. And that goes for all wildlife, really. Yeah, I was trying to think if there's anything else to add to that. Oh, you know, you need to be aware of behavioral cues of the birds. So things to look for if you see a loon on a nest. Some folks have seen them actually lay down their head so they're almost flat as a pancake on the nest, and that is a cue that you are too close. They're getting worried and they might just slip into the water and abandon their eggs, at least temporarily, which leaves those eggs exposed. And then also on the water, you might see an adult do what we call the penguin dance, where they kind of get up on their hind legs and flap, or even just paying attention to increased vocalizations. That might give you a cue that you're too close or you're approaching them and making them uncomfortable.
Yeah, thanks very much. Well, there were a lot of questions about eagles, so, but I kind of condensed them all into this question. We have a growing eagle population on our lake. This is someone specifically. What impact does this have on the loon population, and has this been studied? And I'll give a shout out to Carl Ramsdell. If you don't follow him on Facebook, he has some amazing wildlife photos, especially eagles. He has some great shots and real close-ups of eagles. So let's see. So I'll chime in really quickly with one of the things that I say often when people are unhappy with the eagle situation in Maine. So these are 2 breeding range maps. The orange on the left is where bald eagles occur, and the orange on the right is where loons occur, common loons occur. And so, it's hard to find the total number of loons or bald eagles in this within their range, but it's 100,000 plus eagles and probably close to that, if not more loons. I shouldn't say that. I unless somebody else can chime in, feel free. But lots of loons and lots of eagles historically have overlapped, you know, for many, 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 many decades or centuries. So my response is always, these two critters get along somehow. They've managed to both survive and thrive with overlapping ranges. So my feeling is that loons figure it out, and they have to learn what an eagle is, and they have to learn how to keep their chicks safe. That said, I will pass it back to Danielle, because you had a great, when we were talking about these questions beforehand, you had a great answer. So I know you've talked a lot about this. And from the state perspective, do you want to chime in on eagles and loons?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we have a burgeoning eagle population, and many people have voiced concern over, you know, their impacts on other species within the state. And what's interesting is, though, we have to think of, like you said, Susan, you know, these two species have coexisted before. We might be at a time where we are trying to reach a new balance. So having this increased eagle population on the landscape, loons might not be used to them in recent years, decades, but we hope to, you know, kind of reach a new equilibrium where they can coexist, like you said, learn about, you know, loons learn what the eagles are doing, and they come up with strategies to avoid them. We haven't, while we have seen lots of an increase in the interactions of eagles and loons, and sometimes they're deadly, both for the eagle and for the loon. I mean, both for the loon and for the eagle sometimes. You know, even though we've seen this increase, we haven't necessarily seen an impact on the loon population per se. Eagles are a predator. There are all sorts of predators for every species out there, and so they have an important role there. And right now we're not concerned about that, but I think it definitely warrants more studies and to keep looking into it and to document what's going on out there, and to see if there are ways to potentially minimize it if there's something that humans are doing that could be influencing the interactions.
Yeah, to that effect, actually, I have a couple slides. I'm going to go to this one first. Lucas sent this one, and so I don't know if Lucas, do you want to address this and the cover that's over this nesting platform?
Sure. Yeah, so this photo is your typical loon artificial nesting platform. We call them rafts, is the short name. And it's just a way to enhance a loon's nesting success if they've experienced, you know, poor nesting success for whatever reason. It's typically water level fluctuations or predation. So in order to help the loons on their nesting, we implement these, we call them Avian Guards. So it's essentially lobster wire and synthetic camouflage material that we put over the wire, and just provides a protective canopy for the loons. And that's to protect the loons when they're nesting from eagles. We do have photo documentation, lots of other folks do as well, of eagles trying to grab an adult loon while it's on the nest. That does happen occasionally, and certainly harassment for sure. So this Avian Guard helps protect the loons from the bird predators. Eagles and also ravens will take a loon egg if a nest is left unattended. So it's just a management technique that we've kind of all started using to help loons nest and protect them from bird predators, including eagles.
Great. And then this slide, I think, came from you, Mark. Did I get that right?
Yeah, this is actually from Dan and Ginger Polshuk in Washington State. And I've actually used this in Maine and New Hampshire. And what they've done here, Washington State has a big problem with bald eagles preying on loons at the nest. And what Dan and Ginger and some of the biologists in Washington have started doing is just cutting small alder trees and sticking them into the ground, sticking them into the mud around the loon nest, because the eagles want to fly in. They want to come in like dive bombers and hit the loon on the nest. And if you put these visual impediments there, the eagles don't do it. And Dan and Ginger have found these to be, cheap and easy to put in place on natural loon nests, unlike the platforms that Lucas was talking about.
And Danielle, do you want to comment just about, I hesitate to tell people to do this. Should people check in with you? What you have guidance for this kind of approach?
Are you referring to using rafts or?
No, to this kind of idea of sort of this natural eagle guard at natural nest sites with,
Oh, I see. Yes. Yeah, I wouldn't encourage people to kind of do this. We would potentially have a situation where somebody who's doing loon studies, who are trying to, like BRI often does work on our hydro lakes to try to improve productivity. So folks who are trained and know the signs of, when you're possibly disturbing birds and all that, that would be a situation where it would be appropriate. It would not really be appropriate for people to kind of just take it into their hands to be modifying nests, because that could really cause a lot of disturbance to these birds and make them abandon.
Yeah, Danielle, if I could pick up on that point. I think Danielle made a couple of very important points there, and this has to do both with this kind of modification of nests, but with platforms too. I don't think we want to be doing any significant modification of the environment without actually having data, without knowing what's going on those nests, on those lakes, preferably multiple years of data, so that we have some sense of what we're doing. Going out and just, putting out dozens of platforms is not a great idea, nor would be putting out lots of trees like this.
Yep. Yeah. All right, thanks. I wanted to make sure we left the right impression with folks. So a really interesting tool, but definitely something to check in with folks at Maine Audubon or the state, before you pursue it. All right, to change gears a little bit, talk about translocation. People might be aware that for the last couple of years, loon chicks from Maine have, some, not a lot, but some have made the trip down to Massachusetts, where they were raised to adulthood. And so we had a couple of questions about that. So I'll hand that to Lucas. And Lucas, I did put these slides I put on one here so people can get an idea of where you were raising them in Massachusetts. And if you could just tell us a quick sort of summary of that project. Again, that's another full webinar presentation you're going to get in 3 minutes.
Yep. Yeah, so the speed summary here is that this is a management technique that we've been exploring the past several years, working with lots of folks in Maine, as well as Massachusetts. And it's a way to bring loons back to areas where they once were, and they now do not exist for various reasons. It's usually as a result to human interaction. So for example, we're bringing loons back to areas of Massachusetts where they once were. They haven't been for 100 years. And it was because loons were culled over competition, or perceived competition over fisheries, as well as taking eggs. And so we all learned, loon biologists have all learned over the years that loons are homebodies. They like to return to their same lake or their same portion of lake year after year. And especially the adults, they don't merge far from that. The juveniles will explore a little bit further when they come back as adults in a few years, but they still don't explore all that far. Maybe 15, 20-mile radius. So they're poor colonizers. They need help colonizing if they've been eradicated from an area. So this is a method that we designed with lots of folks to safely and effectively bring loon chicks, typically, not little baby puffballs, but loons that are almost ready to feed on their own. And we bring them to these pens, and they're monitored all day, daily, for a few weeks. They're fed live fish every day and cared for and closely observed. And when they get to the point where they can actively forage on their own, really adept at diving, will go and catch the birds, ban them, and let them go on lakes in parts of Massachusetts that we're trying to restore loons. And to date, we started this in 2015. To date, we've moved a total of 36 loons from a combination of Maine and the Adirondacks of New York to parts of Massachusetts, particularly the southeastern part of Massachusetts. And we're now, the last few years, a lot of these loons that we have translocated are now returning as adults. We're seeing them show up in those lakes that we let them go in Massachusetts. And for the first time, actually this year, one of those birds paired, they nested and hatched and fledged the chick. So that was a milestone for this project that we had. We know loons are returning at a similar rate to a wild population. And now we're having loons from those, from that project that are producing babies. So it's going really well. We plan to do this again this year, and then we'll move to the western part of the state in the Berkshires of Massachusetts for 3 years of translocation there.
That's exciting. It was really, really an incredible project. Thank you. For this one for Mark or anyone who wants to jump in, how good are loons? How good is loon vision? And somebody pointed out that loons seem to see eagles before we do.
Well, I think loon vision is extremely good, and nobody's measured it. You know, there are some other species of birds, cormorants and eagles and parrots and things like that, where people have kept the birds in captivity and done measurements on the accuracy. But when you look at the structure of the loon's eye and how it focuses and all those kinds of things, they have extremely good vision both above and below water. And if you want me to really bore you, I could talk about a really specialized way that they have to focus their eyes underwater, which is cool. But extremely good vision, probably about as good as a raptor, as a bird of prey. I would make one note. There's a commonly held myth that the bird's red eye helps them see underwater. There's no truth to that. It really has to do more with dominance and social behavior than the ability to see underwater. There's some studies going on right now about how the bird's iris color changes seasonally, because it's not bright red like this in the winter. And it's not totally understood yet, but hopefully in a couple of more years, we'll know that.
Well, I can definitely see a newsletter article focusing just on eyes, authored by you, Mark. So thanks for planting that seed. Let's see. I put this one to Jim, but whoever wants to chime in. When do loons sleep? People see them daytime, they see them nighttime, you hear them all night long. When are these guys sleeping?
Sure, I'll be happy to kind of throw a few thoughts out there. So Mark, our team watched loons from like 4 in the morning to 10 o'clock at night, so 18 hours a day continuously. So we did that for summers on end. So we had a huge data looking at loons, what they were doing every minute of the day, how often were they sleeping. Then we got some night scopes and we watched them at night, and that was very exciting and challenging. So we'd watch them from 10 at night to 4 in the morning. These were scopes that actually came from Russia, military, believe it or not. This is a long time back. And we watched loons at night, what they were doing. Loons have the ability to do something called hemispheric sleep, where they can kind of shut down one side of the brain, close one eye, keep one eye alert. So that's probably more in the daytime you might see that, but they can close both eyes. They usually take short naps. And I haven't looked at the hard data in a long time, whether like from 3 minutes to 12 minutes or so, something like that. So mostly like short naps. At night, they took naps as well. They slept a little longer, but they never kind of ever slept for like more, ever like approaching an hour, for example. At night, they were still active, still kind of moving around. And that was kind of surprising to see. So do loons dream? That's a great question. I'm going to say sure, why not?
Well, it's really amazing that some animals can go on that little sleep, or with that sleep pattern, when you know what happens to all of us when we are deprived of our big blocks of REM sleep. We wouldn't be able to function. So that's fascinating. Tracy, I have a raft question here. Somebody was considering building a floating loon raft. So we covered this a little bit, but I think it was either you or Danielle mentioning about, somebody mentioned about waiting. Do you just want to give Maine Audubon sort of quick spiel? And, you know, that we don't, I know when I was there, we didn't encourage people to just throw them out anywhere. Do you want to just give a short answer to that?
I would say, you know, maybe it's a good idea, and it depends. And so we don't expect loons to successfully fledge a chick every year. Some nest failure is expected, so you do want to wait and be sure that there really is low productivity. Your rafts can really be a great way to increase productivity if it's for the right reasons, but it can also actually cause what they call it population sink. So it can, you know, cause declines if they're used incorrectly. So you really want to go on kind of a sleuthing mission before you consider this, and consider why it is that their nests are failing. So is it, some good reasons would be if there's nest fluctuations like Lucas talked about, like if there are dams, and if nests are flooding from wakes, maybe it could be a raft, but maybe you want to address that actual problem of why nests are getting flooded. Why aren't people following the 200-foot no wake next to shore? So there are a few ideas like that. And maybe it's lack of natural habitat. That can be another reason. If there aren't islands or things like that, that could allow loons to nest well naturally, then a raft might be useful. So there can be, and also some land-based disturbance. If you have land mammals or dogs even that are getting into nests, then maybe a raft's an answer. But there can be a lot of things where it does not solve the problem. So I would say take a hard look, have the data to know if you really have low productivity over a long time, and if a raft will answer your question. So.
Great, thanks. I think we already got to this question. I think we kind of already answered about, it was kind of answered in the migration section, so I'll keep going. Unless, Danielle, this was your question and I answered it, I'm sorry. Did you have anything you wanted to add to loons returning?
No, but I have witnessed them do their little flyovers. You know, I walk the dogs every morning, and in early April, I'll hear a loon calling when our pond is completely iced over still, and it's a male, you know, doing the circuit, just trying to figure out when is that pond going to be open.
Oh, good. So that's some data that I should have had, because I've just been going on this store on, you know, I think it was from a Journey North, that school program from many years ago. They talked about that. So that's good to know that it's real. Thank you. Let's see. There's a couple for Lucas, but anyone else can jump in. This is always a question. Do loon chicks return to our ponds with their parents in the spring? And then along with that, maybe, I know it's hard to answer all these questions in our limited time, but a couple people have asked about loons returning to the same lake, you know, to the same nesting territory. So Lucas, you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. Yeah. So this is where banning loons has really helped us answer some of these questions too. So not only do we ban the adults, but sometimes we'll ban some of the chicks as well. Once they get to a certain age, which typically in Maine, New England is about 4 weeks old, their feet are well developed and we can put a loon band on them. And so we can track loon chicks as well, returning and figuring out how old they are when they return, and do they return to the same lake. And so what we found with the banding is it happens sometimes. Sometimes returning chicks as adults will return back to their natal area, and they may interact with their parents. It's, I think, more unusual. So it's not a common thing. Typically, loon chicks, once they migrate to the coast in the fall, they're on the ocean there for a few years, you know, maybe 3 or 4 years before they return back to fresh water. And at that point is when they may interact with their old natal lake and their old parents. But from our data anyway, it seems like it's pretty rare, that interaction.
Yeah. And then kind of following on that, do parents and chicks, there were a lot of parent and chick questions. I think people get very emotional, myself included, thinking about those chicks and what happens to them and where they go. But do parents and chicks ever see each other again after that first season? So you've sort of answered that question. I kept these as 2 separate questions. you have anything to add to this question?
I'll just share one quick interesting story. We have colleagues in Washington State who monitor loons in Eastern Washington. They're wildlife photographers, great field biologists, and they have some of the best data on banded loon observations. And so they know we banded a lot of chicks out there, and they did have this one loon chick. Her name is Amelia. They named. It's also the name of my daughter. She came back as an adult a few years after they banded her, and she has interacted with her parents on and off for multiple years now. Not always great interactions. Loons are very territorial, so maybe they're happy to see each other at first, but it's probably one of those scenarios like, nice to see you, but it's time to go kind of thing. So it does happen.
Yes.
None of us ever feel that way about teenagers, right?
So I think this one is for Danielle. What are signs that a baby loon has been rejected, and at what point should someone intervene? This I thought was a really important question to address, because Danielle, I know you and Tracy at Maine Audubon, you get these calls every summer from people who are distressed about loon chicks that appear to be by themselves.
Yeah, so, and others feel free to chime in as far as some signs that a loon has been rejected, but you know, things to keep in mind are that the adults will kind of leave the young by themselves. They might tuck them into some vegetation on the shoreline or somewhere nearby while they go off and feed, or if they perceive a threat, they might go confront that threat while kind of keeping their young hidden and safe. So just because the adults are not with the young all the time doesn't mean that the young has been abandoned. There have been instances where, you know, adults will actually reject a chick and maybe be even aggressive towards it. And, you know, one of the things that IFNW's perspective on a lot of this is that we kind of need to, in some ways, let nature take its course. There might be a good reason for that adult rejecting the chick. It may be weak, it may be, you know, some sort of defect, for lack of a better word, to describe that. But so it's kind of, we kind of take a hands-off approach with that. And the same thing with eggs, you know, abandoned eggs. So a lot of times people will come across a loon nest that they see an egg in, but they don't see the adults. The adults may be nearby and they may be coming back and they were just taking a break, or you could have disturbed them at that point. But we really need to be sure before any intervention takes place. The other thing that we often, we're a little more open to kind of rehabbing or capturing and rehabbing a loon chick, or even taking a loon egg, if we know that there was some sort of human-caused problem here, a boat strike of the adults, or, you know, one of the adults died from lead poisoning, something like that. If we know something that humans caused in this situation, which is causing this abandonment situation, then we would potentially step in then. But we do try to take a hands-off approach and let nature take its course most of the time.
Yep. Yep. I mean, we do have some great rehabbers in Maine who will take care of loons if they're in that situation Danielle mentioned. So it's good to know they're there and highly skilled and capable, but also good to let nature run its course as much as we can. And, you know, and there are legal, there's rules about handling chicks, and you know, volunteers want to go pick them up, and that's not allowed under the Migratory Bird Act. So you definitely want to check in with Danielle or somebody at IFNW or someone at Maine Audubon before you think about doing that. All right, so I'm going to try it. We're going to try it. We have 7 minutes to get through the last of our questions. So I'm going to go as fast as I can, to get through 7 more questions. So should we be worried about the impacts of lake fireworks on loons? Tracy, do you want to take that one?
Big question, but I'll try to answer it quick.
No,
there was a bill last year about this, trying to ban fireworks in the shoreland zone. And it didn't lead to the ban, but you can imagine that there could be impacts, such as, you know, this is when 4th of July is when chicks are hatching, and there have been observed changes in the calls, like more yodels and tremolos around fireworks. But it hasn't, because they're at night, it hasn't been really well observed. And so there was one report that came out of New Hampshire that pretty much said that they haven't seen behavioral impacts like nest failures and adults flushing and getting predation. And they also haven't seen contamination, like that fireworks are made up of a whole bunch of stuff like percolate and some other things. And they haven't seen contamination, but that doesn't mean that there aren't impacts. And we get calls every year about anecdotal observations about fireworks. So basically we're encouraging people, if you see things happening, report them to the Warden Service at IFNW, to Maine Audubon, because we need to get a better handle on this. But right now the conclusion is that it doesn't have as big of an impact as some of these other things like lead. And
yeah, and I think more data is definitely key. All right, many anglers say they hate loons. How can that be? But no, really, I've heard this from many people because they eat all the fish. They eat all the fish in the lake. So how do you respond to those comments? Danielle, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, my comment is there's plenty of fish to go around. There's lots of different fish eaters out there. The fact that the loons are at a specific lake means that it is an abundant fish population. But they also eat other things. You know, they eat crustaceans, amphibians, invertebrates. So, you know, it's the chance that the loons are actually going to deplete a lake of the fish population is very slim. The other complaint I get is that loons will kind of follow anglers, and that can be a problem as well. And in those cases, I tell anglers, you know, you can harass the loons, that's illegal, but, you know, you have to reel in and move to another portion of the lake or the pond just to kind of keep any negative interactions from happening.
Yeah, good advice. The typical lifespan of a loon, hopefully this is a short one for Lucas, I guess.
Yeah, sure. So we're still trying to figure that out through the banding, but some anecdotal stuff, we know that typically loons do not start breeding until they're anywhere from 4 to 7 years old. On average, it's about 6 years of age is when the first season an adult loon will attempt to breed. And through our banding, we have some birds that were banded as adults as early as 1993. So some of those birds are at least 33 years old at this point. So we're still trying to figure that out, but the short answer is they can live a long time, at least 33 years from what we know so far.
Yeah, and I think there's one, isn't there one in Wisconsin and Minnesota that's still breeding at that age? It's pretty impressive.
Same here too. The Lake and Bagog is in New England, Lake and Bagog and that Maine, New Hampshire border is a bird that was banded in 1993. And I think Wisconsin also had a bird that same age that's still breeding. And the Bagog bird is still breeding as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Nothing like Wisdom the albatross, but still.
Yeah, what is she? Do you remember how old she is?
She's 70 this year, and she just laid an egg.
That's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
All right. A few more questions. We're going to get through this. We're going to try to end right. We might go to 5:05, but I know people start dropping off right around 5. So I'm kind of watching our numbers, and we'll just keep chugging away here. So Mark and or Jim, just do you have any words of people want to know how they adapt to salt water because they're in the fresh water and then all of a sudden they move, and it's pretty different living in salt water than fresh water. Any adaptations you can share with us about that move?
Well, I think a good general statement, when you think about loons, going back to what Danielle was saying about them catching fish on lakes, loons are opportunistic predators. You know, they're gonna take what's abundant and what's easy to a large extent. I mean, on lakes, a lot of what they take is yellow perch and sunnies and, you know, relatively small stuff rather than game fish. But they also eat on lakes dragonfly larvae and crayfish and snails and all sorts of things. And they take that very wide dietary approach out to the marine environment. The one you see here eating the crab. I mean, I live in the winter down near Scarborough, and I go down to Pine Point and watch the loons fish out there, and they're taking a lot of crabs in the winter time. And so I think they're taking, you know, what's abundant and relatively easy to catch. And, you know, they're opportunistic predators. Like most birds that spend time in the marine environment, they do have a salt gland to help them get rid of excess salt from their bodies. And that gets bigger or smaller seasonally, depending on whether they're on salt water or fresh water. But no, they're good at catching lots of different kinds of stuff.
Good. Okay. Oh, I put this out there. This was Jim's slide that you sent. That was so interesting.
Yeah.
Do you want to add anything to this, Jim? Or?
Well, just, I'm sure all of us are amazed. You know, the other day, below zero temperatures, water 36 degrees, and we know about the conductive properties of cold water, how it robs us of heat. And so here's this loon out here, and you're just scratching your head, like I've been doing, just wondering, like, is this bird stressed at all? Like physiologically, like we're shivering, we're freezing. And all we can guess is just making observations. These loons look like they're perfectly comfortable, for example. And I think I mostly attribute that to the feathers that they have. Their coat of feathers is really zipped tight. And the reason that's critical for their survival is, let's say, if any oil, like a drop of oil, would kind of breaks that zippering, those overlaps, and then that cold water could seep and reach to the body. So I think for the most part, these birds are extremely comfortable. They've showed us they're highly capable of surviving in these temperatures. And I haven't noticed any like hyperphagia, like overeating. If you get cold, most of us know it's like we eat excessively. I haven't seen that in the loons I've watched when I've observed them on really cold days. So I think they're in their comfort zone, in other words.
Interesting. You always think they could go to Florida if they wanted to, right?
Some of them do.
Yeah, some of them do, but boy, there's a lot of loons out there on the ocean in the winter. Let's see, I have just a few more. Okay, I'll take this one, which a couple people asked about wakes created by wake boats affecting loons nesting success. So this is a picture that our friends at Keyser Lake Watershed Association, I think there's some folks from that group on this call. They have been working really hard on this issue. They have a WakeWise publication, and I can share that with everybody after the, in a follow-up email, but we're really concerned about wakes from all boats. A couple people asked questions about the 100-foot no wake zone. It's actually 200-foot no wake zone, and it's an ongoing problem that people don't know what it is. They don't pay attention to it. But this picture I thought was really compelling. This happens to, I believe this is from a wake boat, and you can see that there's a loon, that kind of rectangle object on the right is a loon platform, and you can imagine if you are nesting on that platform and this kind of wake comes at you, your chances of your eggs making it out through a wake like this is really a problem. So yeah, wakes are an ongoing problem. Even on for rafts and for lakeshore nests. So it's an ongoing problem, and we're working on ways to solve it and ways to get the word out to people and make them understand, but an ongoing and important policy issue as much as anything else. All right, we're almost done. Do loons mate for life? Jim, you want to take this one?
Well, based on BRI and what we've seen with all the banding, it seems that they may last together for 5, 6, or 7 years, and then the pair breaks up for a variety of reasons, and then they might repair again. So they might repair 2 or 3 times in their lifetime. So they do not mate for life. They kind of are serial monogamous. So they're together when they're together for 5, 6, or 7 years. And then keep in mind, though, they migrate differently. So unlike geese or swans that might migrate and stay together year round, these birds will, migrate separately and then get back together in the spring and summer, and last about 5, 6, or 7 years, and then they get tired of each other and gotta go, find something else.
I think that's the most sad I've ever made people giving loon talks, is when they hear that loons do not mate for life. People just like to think it's so. All right, 2 more questions. This one, Jim or Lucas, whoever wants to take this. This is just this great photo that George Ely took years ago, but just sort of, it's a pretty incredible illustration of loon aggression. But are loons territorial? We know the answer is yes. And will they attack other birds? So, and yes, we know they fight with each other over territories, and people have some questions about attacking ducks or other species.
Yeah.
Can you speak to either of those? Anybody who?
Yeah, there's actually.
Can I just step in for 1 sec? I have another appointment at 5, so I have to
Okay.
go.
Okay,
I'm
thank
so
you,
sorry,
Tracy.
but
No problem. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. I had fun.
Yeah, so on the question of attacking other birds, this is true of not only of common loons, all species of loons. There's lots of literature going back to the early 1900s of loons attacking and killing mergansers, mallards, Canada geese, cormorants, all kinds of other birds. There's a paper from Europe that purports that loons typically attack fish-eating birds more than they do herbivorous birds. But yeah, there's lots of literature on birds being aggressively territorial, even against swans.
Jim or Lucas, do you have anything else for that?
Just to follow up with that, we've observed that in our teams multiple times, in support of what Mark has said. Testosterone, they're ramped up. I think what would be interesting to look at is, like, are there sexual differences? Is it typically male or female, both attacking other water birds, for example, which would be fascinating to find out. Typically, we kind of are programmed to think, well, it's the male.
Yeah.
Or human bias. But it might be the female as well attacking these other water birds.
Well, one of the things we know from the postmortem studies is the females suffer from just as many wounds as the males do. The females are absolutely as aggressive as the males are.
Interesting.
There's a paper about to come out on that.
Interesting. All right. Well, we have made it to the end. Thank you for everybody who has stayed on the call or on the webinar, and they're always recorded and they'll be posted. So hopefully anybody who had to go early can log back on and watch it. Just the last question, of course, is what you can do. You can't end a talk like this without talking about that. So, so of course, oh, it's interesting. Some of my graphics are missing, but Maine Audubon has a lot of loon lead sinker outreach efforts going on. They have these orange lookout for loon signs that you can post. They have great informational brochures. And if you want to share that with your neighbors, at Maine Lakes, we have a Loon Smart program that works with landowners to get them to manage their properties in ways that protect water quality. I mean, we didn't even touch on water quality and climate change and so many other things that are so important to loons. But anything you can do to keep the water clean and is a benefit to loons. They're visual predators and they need clean water. So maintaining clean water is really important. And so, and I think I just have one more slide. Oh, Jim's book. This was so cool. You sent me this, you sent this in one of your slides. Read Jim's book, because when is it coming out? Do we have a,
it's coming out this June.
All right. So in June, start looking for this book, Loon Lessons, and read more. And then here's just a couple of websites. We don't have anything specific on loons, but we will, because we'll be answering, we're trying to get all these answers collated from this talk. And then of course, Maine Audubon is great loon resources, as is BRI. So, and now it's going to jump right to the beginning.
And just
so with that, I'm going to end the webinar. I apologize we didn't get to everybody's questions, and there were great questions in the QA box. We'll keep those, and I can't promise tomorrow or anything, but we will work on getting them answered. And I appreciate everybody coming. It's always great to see how far and wide people come to our webinars in general, but especially for the Loon one. And, we really appreciate all the interest in this. So thanks. Loon ones are always long, but thank you so much. Thanks to all our panelists for joining us. It's been great having you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.